Hi, everyone. Thank you so much for joining us today. We're going to give it just a couple more minutes as people continue to join here. But please go ahead and in the chat, share where you're joining from, what organization, what location. It's just nice to see where everyone's kind of tuning in from. And then we always like to ask for you to share something that you're passionate about right now, whether that's work related or if there's a book or a TV show that you're really engrossed in right now, share that with us. I'm sure people would appreciate learning something new today. So we'll go ahead. Like I said, we'll give it one more minute here and then we'll kick off. But just as you join, be sure to share in the chat where you're joining from. I'm in Indiana, and thankfully the weather has started to cool off just a little bit. It has been pretty steamy, so we'll take it, or at least I will. I really enjoy fall, so.
Excellent. I'm Abby. I'm in Louisville, Kentucky, and it is very stormy and gray here, so I'm hoping it's not a loud thunderstorm while we're presenting.
Of course, yeah. If only we could control the weather, right?
Yeah, exactly.
And do so much about it. All right. Thank you, everyone, for starting to hop in the chat. Like I said, we're going to kick off here. I just wanted to welcome everyone. We're so delighted to have our guests and our thought leaders with us today to chat about whether your board is serving, or excuse me, whether you're let me get untongue-tied here. Thank you for joining us for, are you serving your board committees or are your board committees serving you? So today we're going to dig into how committees can either be a powerful force for good or whether they can be a bit of a burden, and how we can just continue to work together to move our missions forward. So with us, we have Jenny and Abby, and I'll let them introduce themselves. But again, we're so delighted to have them joining us today to dive into this topic and just be able to right size our committees and make sure that we're moving our missions forward today.
Excellent. Thank you so much, Lavon and Boardable, for having us. We are really excited to be here. Jenny and I are both governance nerds and love talking about boards, so we were really excited to have the opportunity. I'm Abby. I'm the Executive Vice President at Benefactor Group and support our client services team. I'll tell you a little bit more about the kinds of work that we do, but I'm based in Louisville, Kentucky, and have spent my entire career working in nonprofits and or now from the consulting side supporting nonprofits. So really passionate about all of the work that boards help to facilitate. My career has mostly been in fundraising and external relations. So from the staff side, I have held roles previously as board liaison to all of the boards and committees of performing arts centers and art museums, cultural organizations where I worked. I also have served myself on a number of boards, and most recently was the chair of Louisville Public Media until about 2 months ago. So it was a dynamic chairmanship. We went through a CEO transition and a national search for a new CEO, and also, of course, navigated significant shifts in the federal funding landscape during that time as well. So really excited to have a chance to dive in with you all a little bit more on the work of committees. I'll turn it over to Jenny.
Hi, everyone. Jenny Bergman, Senior Consultant with Benefactor Group, and I have been in the nonprofit world my entire career, just like Abby. Either we're glutton for punishment or we just really love it. I'm not sure which one. But board governance, I think, is one of the greatest things an organization can invest in, because if you have a good board, then you have a good organization. And I think oftentimes, which we'll share a little bit today, oftentimes boards just don't know what they're supposed to do either. And so we'll dig a little bit deeper into that. But I have been in nonprofits. I've been in the consulting space for about 8 years with several different firms. But we're excited to talk with you guys today. And really, I think Abby will share the sentiment. We really want this to be a conversation. We understand that chat is our only vehicle for that. But we also want to make this as interactive as possible.
Absolutely. And we'll have some polls throughout. So please participate when we throw those up. This is a look at our team. So we're a boutique consulting firm. There are about 26 of us. The firm is headquartered in Columbus, where Jenny is, but we have consultants and clients working across the country. And we really are designed to be a firm that can meet a nonprofit at any sort of critical point in its journey. So our services focus around fundraising, both capital campaigns, but also capacity building, annual fundraising, really strengthening your fundraising communications. We also work in the talent space, so executive search and also interim staffing opportunities. We help organizations with nonprofit technology, focusing on getting the most from their CRM system selection, but also optimizing the business intelligence that they are using to run their organizations. And last but certainly not least, our strategy work, which focuses on strategic planning and governance. And I think Jenny said this, but we are both board source certified. We love the work of boards because everything that I just said, if you're going to go about a capital campaign, or you're going to search for a new CEO, or you're going to approve a new strategic plan, a board plays such a critical role in all of that. And so getting the governance work right and really providing that clarity of roles and responsibilities and structures to make sure that that's an engaging experience and fulfilling experience for the people that are choosing to share their time and talent with your organization, but also for those of you on the staff side who are supporting them is really, really important. And so we're excited to dig a little bit deeper. As we talk today, we're going to move through the goals and objectives of our session. What are the really practical steps? We want to have a conversation, but we want you to walk away with really practical steps to strengthen the effectiveness of the committee structures that you have in place at your organization. We'll provide some takeaway resources, and then we'll have dedicated time at the end for Q&A, though, of course, encourage you to please submit questions as we go. I see some already coming in. So Levon will help us to monitor those and elevate some that might be timely as we present. So we're going to start just to get a sense of, we know kind of where you're tuning in from, which is all over and really exciting to see, but how many committees do you currently have at your organization? So if you can take a quick moment to submit that, look forward to hearing your responses. Levon, I'm not. Is it easy to pull up the results? Oh, there, I see them coming in now.
Okay, great.
Yeah, sorry, it took me just a minute.
No, it's okay. It looks like we're seeing kind of a pretty even split between those first two groupings there.
Yeah, about 32% at 0 to 4 and another 32 at 5 to 8, 24% at the 9 to 12, and 12% of you at the 12 plus. So really a mix. It's an interesting question. We'll mention BoardSource a lot, but BoardSource has a report called Leading with Intent, and they publish a lot of data about boards in general. And they cite that right now, the average board has 4.1 committees, which is down from previous years. So this trend of organizations really figuring out what kind of committees they need to have as standing committees and what might be able to be moved to a time-bound task force is something that we're going to talk a little bit more about today. But it's great to have a sense of where your organizations are currently. And nice to see that several of you have streamlined structures already. All right. So the 7 practical tips that we're going to talk about today, the first is auditing your committees, right? So making sure that you're not just moving forward a committee structure that has been in place for a really long time, but they're constantly evaluating the structure that you have against the aspirations and the vision and the goals of the organization, and making sure that everything that you're doing from a governance perspective is supporting that big picture. So we're going to talk about how you actually can go about the process of auditing your committees and what sort of questions you should be asking. We're going to then talk about, once you've done that audit, the great news is ideally you come up with opportunities to perhaps sunset things that are either redundant or maybe they're not performing to their full potential or the goal that you originally had in mind. And so it's time to really sort of reevaluate whether that should exist in the first place or if there are other meaningful ways to engage those members and to accomplish the goals that you originally had. part of that can be introducing task forces, different from a standing committee of the board that serves at all points in time, but a time-bound, project-based way for you to engage a group of volunteers around something rather than defaulting to adding a committee. So a lot of times we see task forces come up around things like a master plan for a new facility where you know it's going to be really hands-on. It is a really big initiative. It needs a group of people supporting it, but not forever. And so you don't want to really build that into your overall existing structure. Next, it's really important for all of these groups, whether they're standing committees or whether they're task forces, that there are clear charters. As Jenny was saying, you know, often we find that really capable and passionate board members raise their hand and say yes, and then they're like, what do you want me to do? And so being able to say, this is what we're asking you to serve on, and here's specifically what this group is trying to accomplish, how we are structuring it. And if it is a task force, here's how long we expect the duration of your service to be, at which point we will sunset this task force. Next, aligning the membership to both board member needs or board member strengths and needs that you have for the committee. So it's always this interesting moment, right? From the time that you're really first recruiting people to your board to think about what might gaps be in our current composition, what skills, what sort of connections might we be trying to add? Also thinking, of course, about geography and demographics as part of that. But once you have the people on your board, what is the process of mapping them to the different initiatives that you have via task forces and committees, and that you're really sort of balancing their passion and their expertise and their areas of interest with the needs that you have for those groups. Improving communication flow. So this is really important. Clarifying the role that you have for a staff liaison who's the subject matter expert, right? This is your CFO, who is kind of the primary point of contact to your treasurer on the finance committee, but also thinking about a board liaison that is supporting consistency with minutes and agendas and communication around all of the committees and task forces, often coming out of the CEO's office. And then lastly, this work is never done, right? You should constantly be reviewing to make sure that the structure that you have in place is evolving with the organization's direction and priorities. Again, organizations are living, breathing things, and what you have at a moment in time might not be what you need to have a year from now or 2 years from now. And so the process of constantly reviewing that and just letting that be part of your ongoing work. So we're going to dive into each of these in more detail. And I want to kick us off with one more poll and just ask, how many of you have actually evaluated your committee structure? And we'll say not in the last year, but the last 3 years, just to get a sense of how much this is happening for you right now. I love the somewhat on this, because I think that often means like, well, maybe we started to go down that road, but we didn't really finish it, or, you know, maybe it's not happening quite that often, but it does happen. So we left that vague for a reason. It looks like quite a few of you are landing in the somewhat category, 44%, but 35% of you have done that, which is great. And then about 20% of you have not. So I'm going to talk about when you audit board committees, what are the things that you're auditing for? And there are a number of things that we think you should focus on. So the purpose is simply like, is there a clear reason that this exists? And does that support the board's governance role? The flag there is the board's governance role, right? It can be really tempting to say like, this is something that's really important to our organization, and so we have a committee around it. But really, when you think about the work of it, it is all operational. It is really staff-focused work, and it's not necessarily the most strategic work for a board to be doing. And that can create sort of confusion about board and staff roles. So that's an important piece of this. The structure, you know, do you have the right structure in place to say we have the essential things that exist as standing committees? You will always want to have a governance committee, an executive committee, a finance, usually a development committee. And then what might those task force things be that need to exist for shorter periods of time? So really evaluating that structure overall. Is there role clarity in terms of the focus of the committee on strategy and oversight? And again, not getting in the weeds of things that staff should be handling, what can happen in those kinds of meetings. I think that this often can happen in things like a very programming related committee where it's like board members come away and they're like, wow, that was fascinating. I learned so much about how all of our education programs work, but I'm not an educator, and I'm not an expert in, whatever our organization is educating people on. And so I don't feel that I really added a lot of value or drove decisions. And so then you have staff creating a lot of work to have these committee meetings and, materials and presentations, and perhaps not getting out of it from their standpoint really valuable input that changes the way that they work in the first place. Member fit, this is really important. Do you have the right people on the committees based on their expertise, based on their skills, based on their interest? And I think it's important to remember that member fit doesn't just mean that you put everyone who works in finance on the finance committee, because often people want to come to boards and say, I have expertise, but I also want to sort of flex into a different area where maybe I have a lot of interest, if not as much professional background. Engagement. So do people feel like their time is used well, right? Do their contributions matter? Kind of going back to that role clarity. Do they leave a meeting and say, I have actually helped this organization do meaningfully different work because of the time that I spent? Capacity, are people stretched across too many committees? Jenny and I are working with an organization right now on a governance assessment, and someone on their board is serving on 7 committees. So that person is very, very, very busy. And the flip side of that is they have, I think, 11 board members who are on no committees, right? And so when you think about that balance of, do people really have the ability to contribute meaningfully? That's important. Are they relevant? Are you, again, regularly sort of winding down things that are no longer serving your purposes? And alignment, is there clear communication between different committees and between the board and the staff? What can happen is oh gosh, I'm on a lot of committees, and so I heard the same update in finance and executive and then the full board. And so making sure that you're really coordinating sort of the information flow between the different committees and elevating work appropriately. And then at the end of the day, is this committee's work making the board stronger in its aspirations and its governance role and sort of driving the organization to the future? And so these are really important things to think about when you audit your committee structures. And I think the organization that I was mentioning, I think there's an interesting example there where they actually have 15 committees and task forces right now. And so part of the reason that they engaged us was to take a really objective look at this. But when we started to unpack why they had that many committees, it was interesting because a lot of them had evolved from this real desire to engage. It's a large board, in part because it has appointed and elected members. And so it sort of needs to be larger by mandate, but they wanted to engage everyone on their board in a meaningful way. And that in some instances led to creating committees because of skill sets that they saw on the board as opportunities to really sort of plug into people's passions, but maybe not always the most strategic for where the organization needed to go. And as a result, with that many committees, they have some committees that are truly committees of 2 people as well, right? So really wanting to sort of balance that workload. So with that, I'm going to turn it over to Jenny to talk a little bit about how to sunset committees.
Yeah, so Abby talked about auditing, which, we'll share a resource at the end that has all of those things laid out. So if you were taking copious notes, that's coming. But one of the things that's really interesting, and I think oftentimes we see as governance consultants, is that organizations are a little bit worried to take something away from one component of the organization. So whether that is taking something away from staff or taking something away from the board. And so we kind of recommend in this little chart, which I will do my best job trying to explain this to you guys. So if we think about the board function when it comes to committees, it's really strategic. It's to focus on governance, oversight, and big picture decisions. So for instance, if you are entering into a master plan, or if you are entering into a campaign, that is an incredibly strategic decision for the organization to enter into that. However, the operational aspect of it is the staff function. So they are focusing on day-to-day management, program execution, but those tactics, and they're really carrying that out. So in the plot graph on the screen, you will see strategic is in the top left corner, and then operational is in the bottom. This is derived from a board source resource that they came up with many years ago But this is a great activity to do with your board in your executive committee and then your staff leadership. So really asking the question, are our committees a board function, meaning strategic, or are they operational and staff functions? So Abby used the example of education, right? So an education committee may be interesting because they're hearing a report out of your programs and services. However, as a committee, is that really necessary? So the line down the middle is sort of that dividing line of saying, this is closer to an operational function or a strategic function. And so education, for example, that's really operational, right? An organization and their staff are doing the work. Now, board can be brought in to be subject matter experts. Let's say, for instance, you are a K through 12 program or an early learning program. The staff is carrying out the early learning, right? However, the board may have KPIs that they need the staff to meet for various different reasons. But do you really need a committee for that? Is it really just bringing in those subject matter experts that may be experts in early education? And then you have sort of board source recommends for committees that are standing committees, which is executive, governance. Some people call it nominating. I vote governance, finance, and then audit is a separate component of that. And then development, fundraising, if you have that and prefer that. But this is just, you get closer to the line. So for instance, finance in this circumstance, your CFO will sit on that committee. Also, that CFO needs to provide financials to the board. And so that's why it sits a little bit closer to the line. But this is a really great exercise to do with your board and staff leadership, like I said, to really gain clarity on who is really doing what. And for those of you, who have more than 14 committees, bless your souls, perhaps this might be a tool to evaluate those and make some alignment around consolidating or sunsetting committees. So we have another poll. Does your organization create committees for all initiatives? And I cannot see the results, so I'm going to have Abby read them.
Excellent. They're still coming in. 64%, 72% saying no. So this is good.
Good.
We have a lot of somewhat saying, 30% saying somewhat, 11% saying yes. So now 14% saying yes. So I think a good mix, but we're landing around 50% saying no and 30% saying somewhat. So yeah.
So to think about that, the 30% or even the 50% who maybe you are like, we've evaluated these and consolidated them, but now you're double thinking that, perhaps go back and use that tool in addition to the auditing of your committees. Okay, Abby?
Yeah, so we're going to talk a little bit more about task forces for time-bound projects that can help you to avoid building out another standing committee. So, one, what are the benefits? They're focused, they're created for a specific goal, a specific outcome. They're time-bound stints of intensive service, right? So we talk about the ability to drive really clear deadlines on something that people will not need to serve on indefinitely. So you can really create that urgency. So I just came out of a Louisville Public Media Board yesterday, and we said, we're going to create a task force around strategic planning, and they're going to meet 6 times in the next 12 weeks, and then they're not going to have to meet again, right? And so this idea that we're going to really drive it, but not for a long period of time. And it can, again, help to eliminate the bureaucracy and the long-term maintenance of inactive committees or committees with low membership, because you're really sort of reacting to a moment in time and creating an opportunity to do that. So this is important when you need rapid results, when you need to really move into action around something, when you have a high priority initiative, but not an ongoing organizational need, or sometimes, unique and non-recurring challenges. I will say, right now, we're seeing a lot of task forces pop up around organizations that are navigating unexpected shifts to their funding mix with what's happening with federal funding, right? So let's create a task force that can look at this. It's not exactly the work of the development committee, but we want to sort of revisit our strategy around what our revenue mix needs to be. So Jenny, I would love to hear from you kind of what you see as examples of effective task forces from your work with boards.
Yeah, so I think, the most natural one to talk about is strategic planning, right? So strategic planning is a short term assignment for the board because, again, going back to that board strategic function, they are setting the direction for the organization. They are not carrying out the tactics. So although a task force or the board may be reported out to from the staff, the initial planning and visioning that they are doing is really their short-term time-bound task. So moving that into the full board when the strategic plan gets set is really common practice, as many of you I'm sure have seen. The other is a CEO search committee. We as Benefactor Group, we have an executive search practice, and oftentimes a personnel committee could be assigned to the search committee. But something that, again, back to what Abby said, it's time bound. You are going to hire this CEO and then the search will be over. Now, what I will say, another time bound task force could be a CEO transition committee that the search committee then hands off to the transition committee to really onboard them. What does that look like? So there can be multiple people. And going back to originally what Abby was saying about engagement and member fit, those are two different skill sets, hiring and then transitioning. So you could have different people on those task forces. And then something I think that we are seeing a lot of conversation around is task force related to merger exploration, especially as funding shifts and changes. Are there opportunities for mergers? And you may have an organization in mind, certainly, or maybe you don't, but that could be a great board task force to explore that merger option. Did that answer your question?
Yeah, that was great. And Jenny, I'm curious also, you're talking about that, but like, what about when you've got someone on your board that has a really specific skill set, you need to lean on them, but like, do you need a task force to do that? What's the right way to do that?
Yes. So this is my favorite thing ever to do with board members. So I think a good example of this is, let's say your organization is going through a rebrand and your organization is like, we need to create a board task force for a rebrand. Well, technically, if you think about that plot chart, it is a staff function. However, do you have people that sit on your board that are a chief marketing officer at a corporation or things like that? Those just become subject matter experts. And those can be great advisors to the process. And what a good linkage between staff and board members too, for them to learn from these subject matter experts, and could be also set up as professional development for some of the younger staff. So a task force does not always need to be created, or a committee is what we're trying to drive home.
Excellent. That's great. We have a couple of questions coming in, Jenny, so I'm going to pause before we move on. The first is, how different is board governance for nonprofits versus for-profit companies? I will start by saying Jenny and I are experts in the nonprofit side of this, and I do not consider myself, nor do I think Jenny does, to be an expert in for-profit companies. So I don't know how well we can speak to that or how fully, but Jenny, jump in if you have any.
No, that is like me giving legal advice, which I am not a lawyer. So I do not want to touch that with a 10-foot pole.
I do know that often you are paid to serve on for-profit boards, and usually you are requested to give a gift to nonprofit boards. So that is a fundamental difference. But yes, we should not give that advice. The other one I think we can address more fully, which is, why do committees have to be either strategic or operational? My organization's committees are almost all fully integrated at both ends, and it seems to be working. Shouldn't all operations be strategic? That's one that I think we can speak to a little bit more.
Yeah, that's such a good question. And I think if you think about who is held accountable for the work, it's not that you can't have strategic and operational, because obviously you can. I'm sure many of your organizations have strategic experts that sit on your staff and who are well tenured in this work. But I think it also, for me, it gives you a common language to really think about who is driving the work and how you separate those out. It's not necessarily one side or the other. You know, Abby and I always say to our governance clients, you have to do what's right for your organization. So I think to the person who said this, if this is working for you, go forth. Like, I think that's great. But also ensure that you're evaluating your committees too, to make sure that they're fully functioning, would be my advice.
Awesome.
Yeah. One other question we had come through, ladies, that I think is relevant to kind of what we're talking about now is, would you consider a subcommittee the same as a task force, or how do we distinguish between those? That's kind of an interesting question.
Mm-hmm.
Thank you. Jenny, do you want me to jump in?
Yeah.
Yeah. So I think not necessarily. You could have a time-bound subcommittee of a committee, right? So say your development committee is going to have a task force that is a subcommittee of development that is focused on what's happening right now with federal funding. So perhaps, but to Jenny's point, like finance often has a standing subcommittee that is on it, that is a component of, but something you are going to need at all points in time, but might not require the full membership of the finance committee, for example. And so I think that it can exist in both ways. I think the difference is a subcommittee can be standing and can be sort of enduring.
Mm-hmm.
Yeah, that makes sense.
Cool. All right. Jenny, I'll let you keep rolling with role clarity.
Yeah. So our fourth component principle is clarifying committee and task force charters with goals, roles, and sunset timelines. So how do you really distinguish between a standing committee or a task force? And I think the subcommittee question is so valid too. But something we want to do, the first bullet here is define purpose and alignment. What is the primary purpose of this committee task force? Is it, we'll just go with finance again, finance. The board needs to approve the budget. The board needs to approve the audit. What does that really look like? They also are, as board members, they are the primary fiduciary of the organization, and they are held accountable, not necessarily the CEO, when it comes to the ultimate legal duties of you as a board member. Another thing too is, how does the committee task force support the organization's mission and really advance those strategic priorities? So I think if you cannot answer these two questions easily or with strategic thought, perhaps you do not need a committee or a task force. Perhaps you need something like a subject matter expert. And then the next bullet lists 3 to 5 key responsibilities. What are the 3 to 5 core functions of this committee? Are the roles and responsibilities clearly defined and understood by all members? This is so important because, like we were saying at the beginning, board members, one of our governance clients said to us not too long ago, I sit on this committee, but I have no idea what I am supposed to do, nor what is my purpose. That is detrimental to the committee structure, right? And not to be dramatic, but it is. If they don't know what they're doing, how can they support the strategy of the organization? And then the third and final bullet here is understand the effectiveness of the committee or task force. How well does the committee achieve its objectives? Are they engaged? Does the committee meet regularly? What are the expectations for sitting on that committee? And then I think the other thing we always want to do is celebrate success, right? What are the notable accomplishments in the last year that this committee has achieved? And for finance, it could be we passed a balanced budget and we have blank amount of money in cash reserves. So it doesn't have to be huge or new, but it's are you tying celebration to your KPIs that you're setting for these committees? And then we have another poll about, do you have a board recruitment matrix? which you can see Abby and I getting hard eyes because this is such a great tool for boards. But we're curious if you have them. Abby, do you want to read the results?
Yes, they're still coming in, but right now 60% do and about 40% do not. So we're now getting a little 55% do, but a lot of you have them, which is great. And they are such a helpful tool and really allows the governance committee to make more strategic decisions, not only about who serves on the board, but then how you can resource committees based on that information. So that's great to hear.
That's awesome.
We'll talk a little bit more about why that matters. So again, when you think about the structure that you have in place, you've evaluated that. So then you begin to think about the member skills and the expertise that you need from these committees, ensuring that you have even distribution so that you can have contributing members, even engagement across the board. In many boards, we see a requirement that people serve on at least one committee while they're serving on the board, which can be a nice way to ensure that people are at least at that level evenly distributed. And also, it's really important that board members know once they join your board what the process is to be plugged into a committee. Will they be asked to serve on something? Will they be asked what they might be interested in doing? We talk to clients all the time where people say, like, I joined this board 4 years ago and I know there are a bunch of committees, but I don't know how you go about getting on one. I've never been invited to serve on one. I assume that's just not for me, right? Again, going back to Jenny's analogy, like, it's not that different from a job, right? People have signed up, they've said, yes, I'm going to do this, I'm going to serve on the board, and they want to know what's expected of them and how things work, and they want to be celebrated for, contributing well. And if they're not meeting expectations, they want to be supported and understand how they can get better at that. And so this is a really important piece of this. We'll show a board matrix example for those of you that maybe don't have one yet. And these are just a couple of things that we think are really important. So a typical board matrix would, and we ask board members to self-identify all of these things. It's best practice for that to be the process rather than staff members trying to determine where they think people would fall. But in addition to things like areas of expertise and personal style, we also have, connection to others, whether that's potential funding resources or community partners, demographics, geography. And so it's a real full snapshot for your governance committee, again, to see who's serving and what gaps might exist. And then you can begin to see, particularly when you think about committees, like areas of expertise and style, like, are people good communicators? Are they strategists? Are they visionary? It helps you to really understand where they might best serve and where you have gaps. So again, one of our clients it's a very large board. It's 41 members. And we did this full matrix for them. They did not have one. And at the end of it, it's like, no one on your board thinks that they have human resources or social media or technology experience. And when you talk about being an organization of the future and being an employer of choice, these might be important perspectives for you to consider around the board. And then specifically when you think about committees and task forces, those might be some areas where you really need to invest in some recruitment and cultivation for future boards. I'll turn to Jenny.
So number 6 is, we all want to communicate effectively. And so this is really about how to improve communication flows, because we have seen oftentimes the executive committee can become almost a board within a board. So there's great communication flow between the CEO and the executive committee. And then the other committees or task forces or staff kind of float. And what we prescribe is really, how do you assign the right staff liaison to each committee? So again, I'll go back to finance because it is the easiest example. Is the CFO is a great staff liaison to the finance committee. They understand the language. It's common language for them. Another really good example is if you have a board liaison who is sort of like an executive assistant to the board, that is a great board liaison along with the CEO to the executive committee. Just so communication and updates and whatever that looks like for your organization just flows freely. The other thing too is just practical tools, which I'm sure some of you have especially if you use Boardable. But, create a process for regular updates, clear documentation, timely feedback loops. I think one of the things that we often hear from board members is we just don't know what's going on. And then we hear from staff leadership, we don't know what to tell them. And so if you can create regular updates from the CEO, something that is really helpful is either a bi-weekly or monthly communication from the CEO to the board as a whole, but then what do those committee structures also look like and what do they need to know? Abby has a really, really good example of this, and I would love for her to share.
Yeah, so Jenny and I were talking, and I was saying that one of my earlier positions, I was chief of staff at a cultural organization, and that really meant that a big portion of my job was board relations and serving as that board liaison. We had two boards, one that was governor appointed and a separate one that was an endowment board. And we went through the process of doing many of the things that we're advising you to do today. But when I started in that role, we had 16 committees. Some of them were committees of just one board or the other. Some of them were committees of both boards, designed to really connect the work of the two together. And it was the vast majority of a full-time job to make sure that those staff liaisons who were the subject matter experts had what they needed in terms of a master calendar for the year, making sure that agendas went out on time, making sure that meeting minutes went out on time, making sure that new board members of both boards knew the process to get involved with one of those committees, making sure that we were really thoughtful about people who were leading those committees from a volunteer standpoint, because that's a lot more structured than just the chair and vice chair of two boards, and the treasurers, right? There are a lot of different committee leadership needs. And so it was really important for us as an organization, a larger organization, but to have a centralized point to support all of that. And so again, the good news is they no longer have 16 committees, but the other good news is that we were able to centralize and coordinate that at the time. So. And I do see we have a number of great questions coming in because we're near the end of our presentation. We're going to save those for the wrap up, but please keep them coming. We look forward to answering them.
Yeah, so we have one last poll, and that is, do you have succession planning in place for board leadership? And by board leadership, we mean officers, committee chairs, that line of succession and what that looks like.
All right. Oh, we've got a lot of somewhats on this one. We left that for a reason. We often see that maybe that exists at the chair level, but not at the committee leadership level. But about 39% of you do, which is great. 15% of you don't. So I'll talk about why this is important, right? It's understanding what the purpose of the committee is, understanding that someone is ready to step in and lead that really clearly is very, very important, and aligning that with overall organizational leadership goals. So I mentioned that I've been chairing Louisville Public Media's board. What was great about kind of where we were as an organization was a really thoughtful chair succession plan. And so I was chair-elect for a year, serving alongside another board chair, and then I am now immediate past chair, and I am serving alongside the board chair who followed me and helping to sort of mentor them. They've also shadowed me for a full year, right? So really thoughtful. Before you're fully in the role, you're shadowing someone else for a year, and then after you move out of it, you're supporting someone else, you're mentoring someone else. However, we have a good committee structure in place, and it's 5 committees, and they all make sense with sort of standing committee structure, but absolutely no succession plan in place for committee chairs. And so people started to call me and say, like, this is really meaningful work to me, but I've been chairing this committee for 4 years, and I don't know who's going to come behind me, and I don't know who's going to talk to me about that, right? And so we actually were able to implement a similar structure that's on a rotating cadence, so that you're not getting a full new class of leaders at once, but alternating when the actual chairmanship changes. The committee chairs change in the off years now, and so there's a good chance for sort of coordinated effort and knowledge transfer between those. And so that's a really important thing that once you have the right structure in place, the next thing is making sure that you have people equipped to lead that structure and move it forward. And that means and it also gives newer members of your board, or perhaps people that haven't been as engaged, an opportunity to see themselves in leadership because they don't feel like, oh gosh, well, I just have to wait until Jenny terms out of this board to ever think about what it might mean to lead the committee that she's leading, right? There's a structure and a cadence in place for that. So that's something that we recommend to all of our clients as well. Would love to just briefly move on, Jenny, to kind of the follow-up before we dive into Q&A.
Yeah, so we often talk about trends at Benefactor Group. We are lifelong learners. And so something that we wanted you to drop in the chat, as we get to the Q&A section, but a couple of things we wanted to share with all of you, some things that we're seeing, and Abby, jump in here. But one of the things that we're seeing is governance committees are more comprehensive than just being a nominating committee. They're focusing on true governance. And what I mean by true governance is they understand their board roles and responsibilities. They understand their legal duties. But I think also in bylaws, nominating committee is very old school. That is something that, gosh, many bylaws still have in place. There's also a recommendation that I'm going to throw in to review your bylaws annually to make sure that they are not to amend them, but to review them as setting board expectations. The other thing that we're seeing is, and we mentioned this earlier, but we're seeing task forces created to meet the needs of the moment. So, in 2020, 2021, we saw a lot of boards grappling with, should we have a DEI committee? And a lot of them instituted that work. Some of them have been sunsetted because a lot of those values are now ingrained into their board and organizational culture. The other one that we're seeing right now is that task force around federal funding. If you are receiving a lot of federal funding, board, like I said, is the primary fiduciary. So they're really important in this role about creating, whether it's bridge funding, whether it's creating sort of a risk management plan if that federal funding or state funding does go away. So those are kind of some of the things that we're seeing. But what are you all seeing? And then we want to move over to Q&A too. Anything popping up, Abby?
I'm not seeing much come through in the chat. So maybe we just dive into our question.
Yeah.
Cool. Excellent. Well, thank you all so much. I'm going to pull up our questions and begin to dive into those. And Jenny, I'll ask them and then we can tag team answering them together. The first one is, how long should the chair term be?
Abby, this is such a good one for you.
So we often see 2 years as a best practice. Sometimes it is 3 years aligned with often 3-year terms are a standard. And so sometimes we see 3 years, but 2 years is a really good amount of time. Again, we like to talk about time-bound stints of intensive service. People can really focus on something for that period of time. And particularly if you want to add on to that, a year sort of shadowing as chair-elect and a year as immediate past chair, that really is a 4-year commitment. And so really 2 years in the chair role, we think is a nice amount of time for that, but it also avoids the changeover every year, which can be taxing on an organization because there is a learning curve involved in serving in a role like that.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, and I think too, we've not only seen that with clients, but Abby is obviously experiencing that right now with her own board work. Something else that I think is really interesting is to the past chair to make them the governance chair, because the governance is really the conscience of the board and moving people through expectations and things like that. So that's also another option, so that they can still kind of be on board, but they also have a purpose.
Absolutely. All right. What is the best way to handle situations where non-board members participate in a committee but shouldn't be voting on activities?
Oh, it sounds like there's something there. I think it's the simple answer is they're non-voting members, so they don't have a vote. I do think though to reframe that, non-board members on committees, especially your audit committee, is incredibly valuable as a check and balance. And so Board Source encourages it. We encourage it with our clients to have those. It's also a great recruitment strategy to see, have them get their feet wet a little bit before committing to being a board member, because it is a lot of work. And so this is a way that they can kind of dip their toes in. It's also a great opportunity for young professionals to get a sense of a board too. So I don't know if that answered their question, but.
I think so. Yeah, I think that was a great response. There were a couple around that notion of having non-board members serve on committees. So we won't dive into the others unless we have more time because they're similar. But another question that someone submitted is, should the company provide education for key responsibilities to help board members understand their role? Yes, yes, yes. We are so passionate about this, and it should start at the moment that you're first having a conversation with someone about potentially joining your board, because that conversation should begin with, and here's what we request of our board members, right? And then it should also be part of the onboarding process. It should be part of evaluation. And we recommend that board members evaluate their own effectiveness on the board every 2 years, and in the alternating years, evaluate the effectiveness of the collective board. But also, this is sort of specifically what you as an organization are asking your board members to do. There's also a role for just a reminder of the 10 board source roles and responsibilities of any and every nonprofit board. I think that can really help to kind of level set. And again, no matter how many boards people have served on, we do that sort of training all the time. And people in the room are like, oh, I didn't realize that was part of what we had signed up to do by serving on this nonprofit board. And so I think that can be and there are things in that, right? There's another question about the role of the board in fundraising. There are things in that, like ensure adequate financial resources for the organization. And so then suddenly it becomes easier to talk about the role of the board in supporting your fundraising because you've had that conversation. So yes, we think that is very important.
I also think, if you have limited time with educating your board on their roles and responsibilities and governance as a whole, something we often share with clients in our campaign service is continually keeping philanthropy at the forefront of board meetings. So you could have 15 minutes of every board meeting that you are educating them on some type of governance. And that's a really good tool so that it becomes this common language that we're talking about, because obviously, if any of you are development officers and you've been trained over the last 2 decades, the one thing that you hear is a donor has to hear thank you 7 times before they actually hear it. And it's the same with board education.
Yeah, absolutely. All right. How far should committees and subcommittees liaise between each other before reporting to the full board?
Oh, I love this question. I've never gotten this. This is so good. Abby, do you want to take it?
Get it started, and I'm happy to dive in.
So I think a structure that is really important is that the work happens at the committee level, right? And so they have these, if you are doing committee charters and you are setting goals for the year, let's say committees meet 6 times a year. What are you accomplishing in those 6 meetings? But then what is your purpose? And are you making a recommendation to the board? So we'll go back to our example of finance. Budget is approved hopefully in the quarter before you actually use the budget. So what has all of that work happened with the finance committee and the CFO and the CEO in order to set them up for the success? So then the finance committee meets, they say, this is what we're going to recommend to the board. And then they recommend this to the board and the board says A or nay, right? So all of that committee work can happen over 1, 2, 3, 4 quarters, however long. But putting that purpose and goal in place, I think with charters is really, really important. So that liaising, how much time is there before you make a recommendation to the full board.
Absolutely. LaVon, maybe time for one more question?
Yeah, that sounds great. There's so many that are coming in. I just want to remind people too that there will be follow-up afterwards too. So if we didn't get to your question, we are more than happy to do that. So just keep submitting them, and yeah, let's do one more.
Yeah, and you have our emails, and we'll send a follow-up with some resource guides. But one of the questions that I saw was, let's see, sorry, I just lost it. How do I get an advisory committee to be more invested in their role? They aren't responsible for anything, and I feel like I'm talking too much and they're not talking much at all. So first question I would ask is like, if they're not responsible for anything, like what are they advising on? So I think, again, making sure that you actually have the right structure around that committee in the first place is an interesting one. I come from arts and culture, as I mentioned. So I worked in an organization that had 2 boards, one which was a 90-person advisory board. Again, probably not really advising us, but they were ambassadors in the community. And we struggled with this very thing. Like, we're just presenting to them all the time because they're not voting on anything, right? That's the governing board's role. But wow, it's 90 people that care about this organization and show up. And so I'll share a fun example that worked for us. And again, it's organization specific, but art museums are never going to let the community like determine what art goes on the wall and what exhibits you host, right? We have professionals and curators who do that. But we found a really sweet spot. Anytime we had a big new exhibition coming to town, we would say, like, brainstorm, you talk to us. How do we bring this to life in our community? Help us think about the community partnerships, help us think about potential audiences, help us think about who might be interested in this. And then my favorite takeaway example, we had a Hunter S. Thompson illustration exhibition. And I kid you not, we gave live tattoos on a Friday night in the middle of the art museum lobby. And it was the idea of someone on the advisory board. And we had to turn away like 50 people because we sold out and didn't have enough time to give all of the tattoos. But it also created this like totally new big audience for us, and they had ownership and they came and brought their friends. So if you can kind of help use them as ambassadors who can activate the work that you're already doing and clarify that their role is in that lane and that you value sort of some of their ideas and input there, I think that can be an interesting way to go about that. So. All right, Levon, I'll turn it back to you. Thank you all so much for the great questions. I'm sorry we couldn't get to all of them, but again, please reach out to me or Jenny. We would love to chat.
Yeah, I love that. Thank you both again so much. I loved seeing all the questions come in, and I think it just validates that this is at the top of people's minds, and there are a lot of nuance to it and trying to figure out how to make them work best for your organization. So thank you. Really quickly, I just wanted to mention a couple of things to close us up here. The recording will be available afterwards. We'll also share the slides, and you have Abby and Jenny's information, but we'll be sure to share that as well. They're open to that conversation and being able to help guide any of those questions that came up that we maybe didn't get to. And then as a couple of other quick things as well. If you asked a question and you're looking for some feedback from colleagues, we've launched a Slack community for nonprofit professionals. So we'll be sure to share that link. We would love to be able to have you join and just be able to use it as a collaboration resource and be able to get some of that intel from people that have maybe been there before. So I'll share that link in the chat. And then lastly, if you haven't had a chance to explore Boardable, I encourage you to do so. It can really help as you either build out these committees or kind of reevaluate them to work best for you. It can help to store the documents that are important to them, help with that collaboration and things like that. So if you book a demo by the end of this month, you'll get $100. So that's kind of the promotion there. So just be sure to mention this webinar as you do that, and we'll be sure to get that to you. But otherwise, again, thank you both so much. We will have follow-up coming out to you. But yeah, this was a great conversation. I learned a lot. So thank you both.
Thanks for having us. Great to be with you all.
Bye.